Ever wanted to draft for the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC, the Indigo Disk, but don't know where to start? Well, this is the video for you. What's going on, everybody? You have Tone here, back with another episode in the How to Draft in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC, the Indigo Disk. Continuing from our low tier perspective, episode number 2. This time though, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently for this episode and for episodes going on into the future. Now, for the most part, all the episodes I've done, whether it be the low tier episode from a few weeks ago with Mienshao, Overquill, and Slowking, if you guys missed that, a link to that will be in the top right hand corner of the video, so you can check that out if you guys missed it, or any other of the other episodes from the How to Draft series from standard format will also be in the description down below. But one thing that I have done in all those episodes that I really should try to do differently, or that I want to do differently from this episode is, well, for the most part, most of the team, if not all the teams, have always started out with some core concept already being established. But what if there's a situation where you actually don't have an idea what to get, but you still have Pokemon you definitely want to use? This episode will start that trend going of actually having a means of having Pokemon established that aren't really necessarily round 1 picks. From a low tier perspective, that'll be emphasized a little bit further considering our core going into this week, or I guess not really a core per se from a type synergy standpoint, but they do work well together from an offensive perspective. So jumping right into the 3 Mon core that I'm building around for this low tier episode, we are rocking with Paldea, Tauros-Blaze, KIlowattrel, and Crawdaunt. Yeah, a little bit of a iffy, not really an iffy core, but it's a very good offensive tandem nonetheless. Paldea, Tauros-Blaze is definitely one of the better Pokemon to use in low tier format, being a strong fire and fighting type. However, there is some instances it can struggle a bit with water, breaking through bulky waters, and that's where Kilowattrel does come into play, dealing with those water types very easily with electric stab. And then you have a Pokemon like Crawdaunt. Why Crawdaunt here? Crawdaunt is a little bit of a different, it's just a hard-hitting Pokemon in general that does benefit from having Tauros-Blaze being able to deal with grass types as well as Kilowattrel, and having Kilowattrel give it the momentum to get in and just get up some hard-hitting knockoffs, having strong priority with Aqua Jet. Very strong Pokemon to break down defensive Pokemon with ease. So the idea behind this core is to use Crawdaunt's breaking power in conjunction with both Paldea, Tauros-Blaze to make things easier for Kilowattrel. They all sort of synergize in the sense of breaking down each other's checks, which makes them very formidable on a team in general. The other nice thing about this core is, for the most part, the only real Pokemon in this core that has a argument for being a round 1 pick in a low tier perspective is Paldea, Tauros-Blaze. It can easily be a late round 1 pick, early round 2. Round 2 roughly would be around the standing point for where Paldea, Tauros-Blaze would end up being drafted, as in my opinion. And for the most part, the team itself does hold up pretty well. It does have some glaring holes, obviously. Like, it's a very offensive core, so this team's going to need some a defensive backbone to work off of, which is going to be patched up in the draft itself. So with that being said, let's jump right into the rules and roles, just for a quick refresher of how this team has been how the teams have been drafted. So just a quick rundown. Terra will not play a factor in making the team. However, the final version of the team will have a multitude of Terra options at your disposal, so you can mix and match and choose whatever Terra captains you like. We have a sort of a offensive-ish core. We will establish a more balanced and defensive options as the draft goes along. 2 strong priority options. We already have 1 tech in Crawdaunt. Technically, you can get away with 1, but just having the ability to have that extra need for revenge killing is never a bad thing to have. 2 stealth rockers, which we don't have so far on this team, but for the most part we will address that in the on the team itself. Then we have spikes and toxic spikes just to have the ability to get additional chip damage on your opponent. It's never a bad thing to have. At least 2 Pokemon with a speed tier above base 110, including base 110. Low tier does not really, getting speed in the low tier format is a bit harder to come by, so you could technically get away with having 1 Pokemon that hits base 110 or above, but if you have the option to get 2, then you obviously should get that if it does fit your team. 1 wall breaker, well, we have a good multitude of breakers on this team. Crawdaunt is already a strong, hard-hitting attacker as it is, so we have that pretty much covered, but we do have some other options to consider going down the draft. 1 ground immunity, we have KIlowattrel. Obviously we will add to that since you don't really want your 1 ground immunity to be overwhelmed and predicted on by a super effective rock move. Electric immunity, again we have KIlowattrel, but we will add to that just to ease the pressure off of KIlowattrel from a defensive perspective. 1 bulky water, we do have Crawdaunt, but from a draft perspective, Crawdaunt isn't really seen as being bulky. For the most part, you would really want to at the very least address having something more defensive. From a water type sense, water is one of the best defensive typings to have in draft league format. So having another water type to pair up with Crawdaunt to ease the pressure on it coming in to take those hits would be very, very appreciative. A grounded poison type to not be overwhelmed by toxic spikes by your opponent is just very, very good to have in general. A flying resist, we have KIlowattrel, but flying type Pokemon are very, very common in low tier format, and having a means of dealing with flying types are pretty imperative to have, just to not get overwhelmed by stuff like Hisuian Braviary, Tornadus, and the like. 1 ghost type, and this is basically just to ensure that if you have the spikes and you have your hazard stack core, then you do have the ability to prevent your hazards from being easily rapid spun away. So having a ghost type to at the very least block the potential for rapid spin is very, very beneficial. 1 knockoff user, we do have Crawdaunt. Ideally we want to get at least another one just to make things easier for Crawdaunt for not being the sole item removal on the team, and item removal is very, very handy to get rid of potential heavy duty boots, choice items, and the like, just to make things more difficult for your opponent. 1 fast taunt or encore user, technically speaking we do have a taunt user. It is Crawdaunt, but Crawdaunt is not really the type of Pokemon that wants me clicking taunt, especially considering that it doesn't really have the space to fit taunt. It wants to be used as an attacker, and secondly, base 55 speed's not cutting it as a fast taunt user, so that will be addressed in the draft. And then of course we have the Fire, Water, Grass, Dragon, Steel, Fairy cores. A bit redundant, but in a sense, but it does come up for the most part in terms of being able to just have the best type synergy possible for the draft, just to cover your bases as best as possible. So with that being said, we'll jump right into the team itself. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going off of the assumption that we have our 3 Pokemon, Paldea, Tauros-Blaze, KIlowattrel, and Crawdaunt are all going to be taken on this draft with absolutely no snipes whatsoever. But as you can see, as opposed to previous episodes, they're not round 1, 2, and 3. They are rounds 2, 4, and 8. And I feel a bit justified in doing it like this. I already talked about Paldea Tauros-Blaze being like a late round 1, early round 2 pick. And I feel like round 2 here is a bit more par for the course. Of course, it depends on the draft and depends on what's allowed in your draft league, so things can be a bit hit or miss when it comes to that sort of thing. KIlowattrel round 4 is just a good mid-round Pokemon to get, especially because it does have the ability to Terrasilize in low tier Mayhem, which is what the draft I'll be using is based off of. So once again, shoutouts to OG Albina, Panther, Obo for letting me use the draft board for low tier Mayhem again. Using the same concept here, 110 points to draft 11 Pokemon. We already have these 3 Pokemon in tow, 36 points, 74 points to work with to get 8 more Pokemon to make this team function a whole lot better. And I will say, spoilers, that there is a slight deviation on this draft, which I will talk about towards the end, and I will give alternate options to make things easier as I go along. So first off here, as you see, we don't have a round 1 pick. So to make that easier for us, our round 1 pick for this draft is going to be Hisuian Goodra. So I figured getting at least a nice defensive backbone immediately helps out a ton for the draft as it is. And Hisuian Goodra is one of the best Pokemon available in low tier Mayhem, just because of the fact that Steel Dragon is a great typing defensively. Granted, you are a steel that doesn't resist ice or fairy, but having 150 defense, special defense, meaning it can basically shrug off any hits regardless of it being neutral or not, and just having good bulk overall and being able to be a hard hitting Pokemon regardless, with stuff like Flash Cannon, Draco Meteor, Heavy Slam, another means of knockoff, item removal with knockoff, phasing ability with Dragon Tail and all that stuff. So really solid Pokemon, and has a good versatility, whether it be offensively, defensively. It's just a good Pokemon overall, and it really just gives us something to work off here as a defensive Pokemon in general. Then working with that, we already have our round 2 pick in Paldea Tauros-Blaze, just to complement the rest of the team. Just having a good offensive hard-hitting attacker. Intimidate's never a bad ability to have, especially to be able to soften those physical attackers just a bit, which makes things easier for Hisuian Goodra to take those super effective fighting and ground attacks that they are weak to. So with that, round number 3, I did want to address the get a good flying resist as well as our stealth rocker of choice. So for round 3, we have Rhyperior as the mon of choice. Just a good, fantastic Pokemon in low tier format. Solid Rock is a great ability, especially if you make this Pokemon your Terra Captain. It's just a good Pokemon in general, whether it be Stealth Rock, whether it be Swords Dance, Rock Polish, whatever set you want to bring on this thing. Rhyperior is a absolute tank of a mon, and Solid Rock in conjunction with Terra is just so beautiful. But again, if you want to use something like KIlowattrel as your Terra Captain, by all means you can. Low tier Mayhem will you only get one Pokemon as your Terra Captain, so choose wisely. But regardless, Rhyperior does fit the role of being a flying resist and electric immunity, which is beneficial for KIlowattrel to not be the defensive mon that it really shouldn't be forced into. And for the most part, it just gives us a lot more versatility for our team, with Rhyperior just being a good stealth rocker, a good hard-hitting physical attacker to complement Paldea Tauros-Blaze in general and the rest of the team overall, and just being able to hit hard with like Swords Dance, Stone Edges, and Earthquakes and the like. It's just a very good Pokemon overall, and fits the team really nicely, and it's a good budget for 10 points. You can never go wrong with that. So then we have our round 4 pick, obviously KIlowattrel, providing us the needed speed, giving us the electric immunity with Volt Absorb, and just being able to hit off hard with Thunderbolts, Hurricanes, good momentum with Volt Switch or U-Turn, boost for longevity, but a naturally good speed tier right off the bat immediately. It's just really nice to have for any team in general. So with that addressed, we do have our round 5 selection for the team, and I opted to go with Tentacruel to basically ease the pressure off of Crawdaunt being our bulky water. Tentacruel also provides the team with the grounded poison, so we have no fear of being overwhelmed by Toxic Spikes. We have a Toxic Spike setter as well. We have a third knockoff user, a bulky water, momentum with Flip Turn. So we have a lot of assets with Tentacruel, and on top of that we have Rapid Spin control. So we have hazard control with Tentacruel on top of that. So a really good multifaceted Pokemon in Tentacruel. It's not really going to be the best Pokemon per se, but considering the roles it fits for the team, Tentacruel is just a fantastic Pokemon. It does fulfill a lot of roles, and fulfills a lot of holes for the team in general, between, like I said, grounded poison, T-Spike setter, knockoff for more removal, Flip Turn for momentum. So it has a lot of things going for it for the draft, and having a solid base 100 speed tier does give us some speed to work with in conjunction with Paldea Tauros-Blaze. Granted, Tentacruel isn't really the type of Pokemon that will be running max speed like Tauros can. It's a decent hard-hitting attack, special attacker, but normally you'll be using it more in the bulky role just to ease the pressure off of Crawdaunt, as I mentioned. But for the most part, Tentacruel, like I said, really solid Pokemon, really good overall in general. And aside from that, just fulfills the role compression here just benefits the team so much in the long run. So that's why we have Tentacruel here for our round 5 selection. Then to help the team out even more here, round number 6, I opted for Florges here, and the reasoning for Florges, it gives the team a fairy type, it gives us another fighting resist to ease the pressure off of Rhyperior, taking hits, Rhyperior being weak to fighting, Hisui and Goodra being weak to fighting, Crawdaunt being weak to fighting, so having a good fighting resist like Florges is really nice, and especially good here with Florges for the ability to pass wishes to Hisui and Goodra, which lacks reliable recovery, passes wishes to Rhyperior, to Tentacruel, whatever the team needs. It's just a good, fantastic cleric overall, and on top of that, it still hits pretty doggone hard with stuff like Moonblast. It can be a Calm Mind setup sweeper if need be, and it does get access to momentum with Baton Pass, so if you want to use it as momentum, with like Witch Protect, Baton Pass, Moonblast, and then get the slow Baton Pass out into whatever Pokemon you want to go into, it does work out really nicely for the team overall. But I just felt like the added Wish support and having that cleric in general in Florges would benefit the team really well, considering that most of the Pokemon on this team does lack reliable recovery. So that's why Florges is here as our round 6 selection. Then moving on, round number 7 here, to get some more speed onto this draft because we are still pretty doggone slow, I opted for Espeon as our round 7 selection, and this gives the team a Psychic type Pokemon and a good speed tier at 110, but on top of that, Espeon also provides the team with some pseudo hazard control here with access to Magic Bounce. So far we only have our one Stealth Rocker in Rhyperior and our Tentacruel as a Toxic Spiker, but there will be situations where you really don't want hazards to go up on your side of the field, so Espeon is a fantastic choice to at the very least deter your opponent from freely set up hazards against this team, because it is hazard weak despite having a Tentacruel. And Espeon in and of itself is also still fantastic with being a hard hitting special attacker. Heading off strong Psychics, can be a Calm Mind setup sweeper, and can also be a very solid Terra Captain, as well as it can Terrasilize and low tier Mayhem. But regardless, overall the main idea with Espeon here is it fits the speed tier, base 110, hard hitting special attacker, and you can abuse stuff like Future Sight in conjunction with like Paldea, Tauros-Blaze to lure in the Dark types to take the Future Sight, take him out with like stab close combat, and just go to town from there. But yeah, it also does have access to Baton Pass for more momentum, Future Sight shenanigans, and the like. But yeah, for Espeon, still a fantastic Pokemon despite all the it may not be the bulkiest Pokemon in the world, but it does fit the role of having a fast hard hitting special attacker, which the team didn't really have outside of KIlowattrel, so that does fit the role there really nicely, and having pseudo hazard control is never a bad thing to have. Then we have our round 8 selection Crawdaunt, nothing much else to say about that, just a hard hitting offensive water type, and our dark type for the team, strong hitting with knockoffs, Aqua Jet, Swords Dance sets just to break past bulkier teams a lot quicker, Dragon Dance just to be a bit more threatening offensively against weaker, more frailer offensive builds. But regardless, just a good hard-hitting wall breaker in general for our round 8 selection of Crawdaunt. Then for round number 9, we have our Spiker and Ghost of the team in Brambleghast. So Brambleghast fits the role of being the Ghost, so we have the immediate need of deterring Rapid Spin. If needed, we have the ability to set up spikes, which is really nice for the team in general. And we have another Rapid Spinner on the team as well to ease the pressure off of Tentacruel being the spinner, or Espeon coming in to deter hazards. Ideally, Brambleghast doesn't really want to be spinning as well, it would want to be setting up hazards itself just to put more pressure on the team, and Grass plus Ghost is a really good typing overall, It also gives the team a ground resist, because our resist at this point beforehand was KIlowattrel. So having Brambleghast fits the need for spikes, for spin blocker, ground resist, and it can be really annoying with stuff like Strength Sap to deter those physical attackers even more. So yeah, really solid pickup here for the team at round number 9. And then the last 2 picks here are just a bit more for role compression and fit specific roles in general. So round number 10, we do have Articuno as our round 10 selection. It may seem a bit redundant to double up on flying types, but I did mention earlier that flying is a very spammable typing in low tier format. Articuno does fit the role here of, the main thing that Articuno does here is it gives us additional protection versus opposing bulky waters. So while we do have means of dealing with bulky waters like Brambleghast, KIlowattrel, having extra insurance versus them with stuff like Stab Freeze Dry is never a bad thing to have. It also helps having a second flying type to help out stuff like Rhyperior against grass type Pokemon. You can overwhelm your opponent with flying spam with KIlowattrel plus Articuno, since KIlowattrel, while it can deal with most water type Pokemon, stuff like Swampert, Gastrodon, and Quagsire, it can be a bit more difficult to break through, so Articuno can deal with them with access to Stab Freeze Dry and be a bit more of a nuisance in that sense. And the fact that Articuno cannot struggles versus Steel type Pokemon is not a problem, since it can U-turn out into Paldea, Tauros-Blaze, into Rhyperior, stuff like that. So we have the option to deal with said Steel types at a moment's notice, so it's not really the end of the world there. And just having a bulky Pokemon in general just benefits the team overall. And the other reasoning for Articuno, it just gives us a team another ground immunity, so the pressure is eased a bit off of Brambleghast to be the immediate ground check for the team. And having another immunity does benefit the team in the long run. And then for our last pick in round number 11, we do have Ambipom. This gives us another hard-hitting physical attacker with base 115 speed. With the hazards we have on our team so far, we do have a means now of having additional priority with strong technician fakeouts to just put additional pressure on the team. Another knockoff user, bring the total now up to 3. 3. And then U-turn for momentum, and then of course we do have access to a fast taunt user for the draft as well. So yeah, this Ambipom does fit the role here, giving us a ghost immunity, but more importantly just having the additional strong priority to have in the back. So looking at the team overall, there is one specific drawback, and the main one is the fact that Rhyperior is the only stealth rocker on the team overall. Ideally you'd want to have 2 of them. If you have the ability to bounce back hazards with Espeon, that can be circumvented and used instead, just to make your team a bit more offensive in nature. So a little bit of a alternate for the rest of the team. Ideally there's not really much you can replace when it comes to Hisui and Goodra. Like the only real Pokemon that would comes to mind in terms of replacing Hisui and Goodra would be, like, if you want to keep the same typing, there's Duraludon. But Hisui and Goodra does benefit the team a lot more here, and Duraludon is nowhere close to being a round 1 pick. So having Hisui and Goodra just hold the team together overall, and ideally if you're able to get Hisui and Goodra, by all means grab it. And then for as opposed to Rhyperior, there's Rhydon. If you want to save your points up, you can go for Rhydon. You are a bit more restricted item wise with being a Violite. Another option to consider here, if you want to keep your hazard setter on top of that, there is Swampert if it's available round 3. Going back even further, there's Gastrodon, Quagsire that gives you Stealth Rocks and Spikes on top of that. Just having a means of being an electric immunity is very nice. But the ideal thing with Rhyperior is also being a flying resist. So between Rhyperior, Rhydon, Diancie, ideally you want to have that flying resist ideally locked up. But with Hisui and Goodra on the team as it is, you can be a bit more flexible with that particular Rhyperior slot, and you don't have to necessarily get Rhyperior or Rhydon. Like I said, there is Swampert, there's Gastrodon, there's Quagsire. There are other ground-type Pokemon to consider. Even stuff like Mudsdale is an example, but stuff like Mudsdale and even Quag isn't really a round 3 Pokemon. Even Gastrodon's more like a round 6, if anything, maybe round 5, just for the additional roll compression. But if you do get like a Gastrodon or whatnot, obviously you would switch over Tentacruel. And speaking of Tentacruel, the other option for that, just basically having any sort of grounded poison would benefit the team overall. In terms of conjunction with, if your Rhyperior selection is one of the other, if your Rhyperior is one of the other water ground types, Tentacruel can easily be another low budget grounded poison. So stuff like Alolan Muck, regular Muck, Vileplume would also work here. Granted, those Pokemon, Vileplume does not get access to Toxic Spikes, but it is still a good grounded poison that does have the access to Strength Sap. You would obviously have to switch things up with Brambleghast, with you having the additional spikes and whatnot. But any sort of grounded poison that does have the ability to still be able to do like knockoff stuff or absorb toxic spikes, you really want to address that. Even going as far as like something like a Dragalge, granted that would give you 2 dragon type Pokemon, but the concept is still having a good serviceable grounded poison. Even something like Hisui and Quillfish would also benefit your team, as having a more bulkier dark type Pokemon if you're very, very paranoid about opposing psychic type Pokemon and you don't want your lone dark or your lone psychic immunity being a Crawdaunt, and it eats the pressure off of Hisui and Goodra, then Hisui and Quillfish would also work there as well. Then for Florges, another option, there's Sylveon. Basically the role here is essentially to just get a Wish Passer to benefit the rest of the team. Another thing to mention is if another option for Tentacruel, if you want to keep the spikes, sort of toxic spikes element going, there is Klefki. If you do get Klefki with Tentacruel, then ideally with Florges, instead of getting Florges or Sylveon here, get something like maybe a Vaporeon. This gives you the bulky water. This keeps the Wish Pass concept going. It gives you access to Flip Turn, can Calm Mind, can Scald, do a lot of things for your team, and it gives you a water immunity on top of that. So you have your choices there of whether or not to get the Tentacruel Florges, Tentacruel Sylveon, or Klefki Vaporeon. So you can pick and choose at that sense. There's not really much here to replace Espeon for the most part. Ideally, Espeon just fit the team the best here, if only due to the fact of the speed tier, the need for having a strong psychic type Pokemon in general is just beneficial for the team overall. Like I said, the main thing was having that immediate speed for the most part. But another option to consider if you want something a bit bulkier and still want to keep the psychic type aspect going, there is Uxie, which does give you another ground immunity. I say Uxie over something like Mesprit, if only due to the fact that Mesprit should be taking a little bit earlier than round number 7. Uxie is a bit weaker, but it is bulkier. But for the most part, it does benefit the team, especially considering that Uxie does provide you with a second Stealth Rocker, which this team obviously does not have. So if you don't care that much for having that immediate speed with Espeon, you can go Uxie. It does give you a bit more flexibility and compression and giving you a second Stealth Rocker, so there's nothing wrong with having having Uxie as opposed to Espeon on this build. And then for Brambleghast, there are other options. There's Frostlass as opposed to getting this, but Brambleghast also provides you with the ground immunity. ground resist, excuse me, and of course a flying immunity with Wind Rider. So you can go for Frostlass if you want to keep that sort of ghost type and spikes option going. There's also other Pokemon, other ghost types like Miss Magius to consider, Golurk if you want to double up on ground types. Even going lower than that, maybe something like what's the Pokemon called? Palossand, there we go. While it doesn't provide you with spikes, it does give you a bit more of a sturdier ground, and ease the pressure again off of Kilowatttrel being the lone electric immunity. If you don't go like Rhyperior, well, I already mentioned Rhyperior, but if you keep the concept going of having that ground, then maybe Palossand could work as an additional stealth rocker. There's also stuff like Rotom, regular Rotom if you want to keep like if you want to go double electric. But for the most part, Brambleghast did fit the team the best just because of what it brought to the table that the team already did not have. Then we have Articuno. As opposed to Articuno, technically speaking, you could do another flying type Pokemon. Braviary is an option, although Braviary wouldn't really be a round 10 selection. It would be a little bit earlier than that. And even stuff like Oricorio, as I brought up earlier, could also work in the sense of just being a Quiver Dancer and just more of an offensive threat. Even stuff like Drifblim can work as well, giving you spin blocker as well as a sort of unburdened aspect sweeper from on the lower spectrum of things. And then lastly, for round 11, as opposed to Ambipom, technically you could do something like Zangoose, you could do Ursaring. Basically any hard-hitting normal type Pokemon would fit the bill here. Ambipom just worked here because of the strong access to Fake Out. There's also stuff like Cinccino, Mousehold to take into consideration as well, which would also work as well just because they're both fast and they hit decently hard for their speed tier. So with all that out of the way, that is going to be it for this episode of How to Draft in Scarlet and Violet Low Tier Edition. Hopefully I went as in-depth as possible, and this was a good change of pace from how I've previously done the previous episodes. I look to keep this going forward in the future. I hope you guys still enjoy the videos. I do apologize that they're a little bit more stretched out in terms of when I've been uploading it, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm able to provide you with the most in-depth perspective when it comes to putting these teams together. And it does take some time to actually sit down, contemplate, and put these sort of drafts together for you guys to look through, analyze, and give your own personal opinions, which I do look forward to reading in the comments. But regardless of all that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, feel free to leave a like, drop a comment, click that subscribe button, all that good stuff. I really do enjoy making these videos for you, and I hope you guys took something away from these draft videos, because they are a lot of fun to put together, and hopefully you guys learned something from these videos, whether you are new to Draft League format or an experienced veteran like myself. So, with that being said, again, thank you guys again so much for watching, and until the next time, this is Tone, signing off for now. Peace out.